up our story here tonight, put it back in perspective of the thing that we're talking about. As we come down to the kings and they both come to an end, why, we see in 606 something happened. What was it? All right, the first captivity of Babylon, the first Babylonian captivity. How many Babylonian captivities were there? 3. All right, one in 606, one in 597, and then, Oliver, the big one, okay, was in 586. Now, they're going to be in there for 70 years. How do we know that they were going to be in there for 70 years? Jeremiah had prophesied that you're going to be in for 70 years. Now, I guess the one big reason, I don't know whether to put one reason or not, you could say, well, unfaithfulness and so forth, but what was the one big thing God is going to accomplish out of this 70-year captivity? He's going to cure them of idolatry. Idolatry was the thing that caused the problems. Now, obviously, we can say they were unfaithful to God, and they were unfaithful to God, and so forth, but idolatry was the big thing that was involved in. As you study the Scriptures, I think you could read through and you could come to a conclusion that the worst sin that man can commit is idolatry. I really believe that. I don't know any passage that says, you know, there's sins, the worst one's this, and then it's on down the line. But as you look at them, I really believe the worst sin is idolatry, from the way that God deals with it, the way He condemns it and so forth, there, and what He says about it, and it's such a horrible, wretched thing that it's the worst thing. Now, that's certainly not the worst thing in our eyes, is it? I mean, we're living around everybody, and are there idols in the world today? As you look around, we all probably have a few idols in our pockets. I hope not, but certainly, yeah, we see people having idolatry all around us there. What about back in those days? Was there idolatry everywhere you looked? Yeah, every place you looked was idolatry. What happens to us when we are around something all the time? We get numb to it. We're desensitized. That first of all, we're shocked. And then finally we just get used to it, and no big thing really ever happens in there. I remember back when I was a boy, my dad was an alcoholic, and how I hated alcohol and things that he did and so forth. And finally, I was in college, I know when it happened, Safeway started selling wine. And it absolutely just bowled me over. I can still remember the shock that there was there. Now then, what do I think when I go into Safeway? No big deal. I mean, you walk around it, and you do all of this. Another example I could give you, when I went to the Philippines, I was over there, and so we gave the guys a break, and I had 65 guys that we were teaching, and so they took their break. They all went out in the yard and urinated. And just 65 guys standing out there in the yard urinating. And so I, looking out this window, and I absolutely almost died, just shocked. The time I left, no big deal, you see, to this. And so you get used to seeing things like this. You get desensitized. And so a lot of times we do that, especially about idolatry, because I think there's another thing. In idolatry, it's not a sin against me. Now, I don't like murder, and I don't like robbery, and I don't like lying, because those things hurt me. See? And when you're doing something that hurts me, it's easy for me to kind of not be get numb to that situation. But idolatry is what we do to God. And there's nothing worse than setting aside the God of heaven for an idol. When you stop to think about it, when you set aside the God of heaven, let's just start out like this, just take an individual, he sets aside God. Now, what are his restraints in life? There are no restraints. From there on, the man is free to do anything that he wants to do. Now, he will justify whatever he does, but he is free to do anything he wants to do. And from there on, it's just a downhill skid to the very depths of animalistic type life. Idolatry is a horrible thing. Now, God is going to tell these people then that he's going to cure them of it. So, again, I want to emphasize this. I've done it a time or two way back there a few months ago. I ask it, why did they go into captivity? What happened to get them in there? Oh, they went into idolatry. But why did they go into captivity? And you say, well, because Babylon was a big, strong nation and so forth. No. The reason they went into captivity is because God just pulled back. God just said, okay, I'm leaving. And there you are. And bang. Now, up to this time, God had protected them. Of course, they thought that they had protected themselves in many ways, or some idols had protected them. But God's going to teach them, I'm just going to leave you to your idols. And so what God does is, he then just backs out. And the book of Ezekiel talks about this to a great extent. We'll not be studying the book of Ezekiel in here. But when did Ezekiel preach? During the 70 years. He went into captivity, Babylonian captivity, went in with the second round, and he was preaching to the common people, and this is what he dealt with. He had a lot of visions, and he talks in a lot of visions. And so he tells the people, he says, here in this vision, I see God. God just got up and left the temple and then went away. He just went away. And he left the temple and left Jerusalem there without God. And when he left him without God, then Babylon just swept in and took them, see? And took them into idolatry. He left them there for 70 years, and that cured them of idolatry, by the way. From then on, the Jews really haven't been bothered with idolatry. So they were in there for that period of time. Now then, they went in and they were released in 536. That's when Cyrus released them. Now, remember, Isaiah had prophesied that a man by the name of Cyrus would release them. Now, when did Isaiah prophesy? Way back there 300 years before. See, Isaiah was back there prophesying, and he prophesied that a guy by the name of Cyrus would release them. So they released them. Now then, we put in this 586 and 516. Now that is very important for us to remember because, well, what happened in 586 that's so important? The destruction of Jerusalem. The destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. That's when that happened. And so that is going to be destroyed for 70 years, and it was rebuilt in 516, 70 years later then. So there's where Daniel went in. There's where Ezekiel went in to captivity then at that period of time there. Now, if we take these years and start putting them out, after they come back out then, out of captivity, Cyrus releases them, they come back out, they have then about 100 years in there. And what are they going to be doing during that 100-year period of time? They come out of captivity, they go back to Jerusalem. What are they going to be doing? Rebuilding. That's right. They're going to be rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the walls, rebuilding the law, rebuilding Jerusalem, putting it back in shape. In other words, it's the period of restoration. They're going to restore things like they were before they went into captivity. See? So they're going to go back, and they're going to do that during that 100-year period of time. Then there will be a time that's called between the testaments. Now, in 420 B.C., the last prophet came and prophesied. What was his name? Malachi. He prophesied, and then for the next 400 years, there were no prophets that's in there. And so that's the period between the testaments. Now then, after that then, we find, you come on down, and Jerusalem then was finally destroyed for good. Now in here, I haven't put the church in this chart because I'm just dealing with Jerusalem, see? just dealing with the history of the Jews and Jerusalem that's in there. Now, over there is where Daniel and Ezekiel prophesied in Babylonian captivity. There's where those people lived, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, and Haggai, and Zechariah, and Malachi. They lived in this particular period of time. And over here is where the Hasmoneans, the Romans, and the Herods lived. Now, are they important for us to know anything about? Important to know anything about them? When Christ comes, who's in charge? Romans and Herod. And you're going to be talking about Herods, you see, that's in there. Well, how did they come to pass? What is the situation with the Romans, especially with Herod? And those Hasmonean guys, what about them? They're not even mentioned in the Bible, and yet they're tremendously important because they set the stage for Herod to be brought in. So we'll look at those guys. There then is Christ and his church that would come in that period of time. Now we go back to Daniel 2. Daniel 2 gives us that prophecy, and what was it? Who represents the head of gold? Babylon. The next one is going to be what? Medo-Persians. And then the Grecians. Who's the head of the Grecians? Alexander the Great. Then you come on down, and in 24 B.C., the Romans had been working in their government over there, and they started out as a couple of brothers that came up to this hill, and they started this little city in there, just built a house and started a little city, and they got, there was some folklore that came about them being born, and then a wolf, I'll say it the right way, a wolf adopted them and fed them until they grew up, and so then they were fed with that. Finally, then they got out, and so they started the city of Rome. Of course, all that is in Roman mythology that's in there. So then Rome starts, and they conquer a city, and they do this, and they do that, and they grow, and they keep growing. And by 24 B.C., finally, a Caesar came on the front, see? So we have us a Caesar at that period of time. Now, the thing that is important about there, Daniel 7:13 says, during the Roman occupation is when the kingdom would come. Now, those 400-year periods then is in there, the Grecian down to the Roman period of time that we have. So there again is the period of time of when Ezra, Nehemiah, and so forth is living right there. To put it another way, we're down now to this period of time. You can see David back there in Solomon's temple, down to the second temple that you've got. Malachi is going to be the second or the last prophet that we have. There'll be a 400-year period in there in Christ, and then what's known as the Maccabees and the Herods and development of the Roman Empire. So those are things that we'll have to be going through in order to get in there. But now we're down to the book of Ezra. As we come to the book of Ezra, what is the first 7 chapters of the book of Ezra about? It ain't about Ezra, is it? Not even mentioned. What's the guy's name? Zerubbabel. That's right. Zerubbabel is the leader. So Zerubbabel takes a group of people back over to Jerusalem, and what does Zerubbabel take the lead in restoring? The temple. So he's going to restore the temple when he gets back over there then. And we had a couple of prophets that helped him. They ran into some problems and they quit building, and God sent 2 prophets to preach, get busy building the temple. You remember what those prophets were? Haggai and Zechariah were the prophets at that time. So the book of Ezra is divided into 2 parts. Chapters 1 through 6, it tells about Zerubbabel restoring the temple. Haggai and Zechariah were the prophets at that period of time. Now the other, chapters 7 through 10, tells about Ezra restoring the law. And Zechariah will still be alive during this period of time. Haggai will have died in there. Now there is a 56-year period of time between chapter 6 and 7. How do we know that? secular history. See, secular history, we know there from Darius to Artaxerxes. Okay, so as we start out now in chapter 7 tonight, we're introduced to Ezra for the first time. It said, now, after these things, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, son of Serahiah, the son of so-and-so, and on down the line in here, he came. Now, verse 6, this Ezra went up from Babylon, and he was a ready scribe in the law of Moses. Stop right here for just a moment. What is a scribe? What does a scribe do? Okay, what does a word mean? Write. Scribble. Scribe means you write. Now, he's a man that does some writing. Now, when you look at scribes, all of us do some writing, but there are no scribes in here. To be a scribe, it's an official position. It's a position of where you are given the responsibility of writing down certain documents. And so you might be in the king's house, and the king would hire you as his scribe. And it's your job to write down what he does, his records, and you write it down. So you are a scribe. It's a high office. In the law, it was men who wrote down the law. They wrote the law. They dealt with the law. They were highly educated men. They were a group of men that was capable of working in governmental offices and keeping all the affairs in order. See, it was like this. All right, Ezra was a scribe then. When you get down to the New Testament, the Sanhedrin, I forget the number now, they had of the Sanhedrin, they had 22 scribes. They had 22 chief priests, not high priests, but chief priests. And then they had 22, something else, I forget what it is right now. Then they had the high priest. But at any rate, a scribe was a person in a high echelon, you see, that took care of things like this. So now, Ezra isn't just a normal run-of-the-mill guy in here. Now, he was a ready scribe in the law of Moses, which Jehovah the God of Israel had given. And the king granted him all his requests according to the hand of Jehovah his God upon him. Now, we don't have a record of what he does. It's going to be interesting when we get to the next guy. Wonder who the next guy will be. Anybody got a guess after we get through with Ezra? It's going to be Nehemiah. He's going to tell us how he got selected and so forth. But here, Ezra goes to the king, and he makes a request and asks if he can go back over there. And there went up some of the children of Israel out of the priests and the Levites and the singers and the porters and the Nethinim. Now that Nethinim, we're told elsewhere, they are the keepers of the temple. They are servants. They're the servants is really what they are. All right, so now we've got these and the porters and all these in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king, and he came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. So it took him about 4 months to get over there. Where would he be coming from? Can you visualize it now on the map? Over down there where Babylon is, up over what? What's that called? Goes up the Fertile Crescent and goes back down. And so that walk, it took him about 4 months to get over there. Now, it said he came then on over, and in verse 10, for Ezra had set his heart to seek the law of Jehovah and to do it, and to teach in Israel statutes and ordinances. Now, some of these days I may preach a sermon just on this verse. Stop to think what it could be like. That if all of us had this attitude that Ezra has. As you look at it here, stop to think. For Ezra had set his heart. Now that's important. That's one of the greatest things that a human can do. There are no great men or women that have accomplished anything that haven't first set their heart. They've determined, I'm going to do something. when you say, well, you know of people that they're baptized into Christ, and then they come and they go and they attend and they don't attend, and they're, you know, are they faithful? Well, you don't know. They come and go. What's the problem with that individual, see? The problem with that individual is they haven't done the first thing, set their heart. I'm going to set my heart, set my mind. I'm going to do what God would have me to do. That's what Ezra has done. Ezra now has determined he has a job. So he set his heart. Now, what did he set his heart to do? To seek the law of Jehovah. To seek the law of Jehovah. Now, the law of Jehovah is very important, isn't it? We don't really have to talk about the law of Jehovah because we know how terribly important it is. But notice, he had set his heart to do what? To seek. See, to seek the law of Jehovah. Now, if a person is going to go deer hunting, do you just go out in the woods and shoot a deer? How many of you guys went elk hunting this last year? I don't know if anybody went deer hunting. How long did it take you to kill your elk? You just went out there, and when did you do it? First day or second day? Yeah, he said he didn't want to kill the poor thing. Okay, now what's he doing? And if Mitchell wants an elk, what does he have to do? He's first of all got to set his heart, doesn't he? Because when he gets to thinking about going over there, and his wife fussing on him all the time, until he gets out the door, telling him he's not going to get an elk, and he goes over and camps up there in the snow and heads out through there. You raise the question, what am I doing out here? You know, what am I doing out here? I don't have a thermostat. I don't have this or that. So you set your heart. Then, doesn't make any difference how cold it is. Doesn't make any difference how deep the canyon is. You don't even think about those things. You just go for it. Now, you set your heart to seek an elk, don't you? Now, I bring that up because why do you have to seek an elk? It's hard to find. That's right. They don't just come to you and stand up there and bugle and say, hey, here I am. You're going to have to seek them. And you may have to seek them many, many days. There's no telling what you have to do, but you've got to seek them. We know what seek means. It means to look for, to do everything you can possibly do to do that. Now, he set his heart to seek the law of Jehovah. Do you know the law of Jehovah, to grasp it, to know it, is harder than killing an elk? It's something that you have to set your heart to seek. How long does it take? Don't ask me. I haven't accomplished it yet. It's study. Reading. It's seeking, constantly seeking. And when you believe you have it, you need to go back and double check. And on it goes. So to seek. So he set his heart to seek the law and to do it. He found out what it says. Now I'm going to do it. Pretty good thing to do, isn't it? Now then, once he had set his heart, this is his goal, he's going to seek the law, find it, then he's going to practice it in his own life, and then to teach it in Israel, statutes and ordinances. Then I'll teach it. Once I've done these other things. Would you say I'd make a pretty good teacher or not? Would that be a pretty good suggestion? Somebody says, I want to teach, I want to preach, I want to teach the Word of God. Okay, first of all, you set your heart. You make that determination. That's what I'm going to do. Then you set your heart to seek. And that's going to take years. And then when you find out, you're going to do it. You're going to live a godly life. Now then, you're ready to teach. Now this is the ideal teacher, isn't it? So Ezra is the ideal teacher that you read about. So now he's going over and he's going to teach the law. In verse 11, it's interesting because here we have a copy of the letter that King Artaxerxes gave to Ezra. So he gave him a letter, and he said, "Here, Ezra, you have authority now to go out and take anybody that wants to go back with you. This letter gives them authority to go with you. And it gives you authority to pick up the silver and the gold and all of that that's left here in the king's house that should be taken back and put in the temple." It's in there. They're going to end up with about a $1.5 million worth of silver and gold to take back. Now, so you have authority to do all of that. And it says in verse 18, "And whatever shall seem good to thee and thy brethren to do with the rest of the silver and gold, that do ye after the will of your God. And the vessels that are given thee for the service of the house of thy God, deliver them before the God of Jerusalem. And whatsoever more shall be needed for the house of thy God, which thou shalt have occasion to bestow it out of the king's treasure house." Now think what's happening here. You see, they were taken in for captivity. Now they're sent back. He's given him all of this silver and gold. And he said, "And if you need more, where do you get it? Get it out of my treasure house. I'll pay the bill for you going back." He said, "And I, even I, Artaxerxes the king, do make a decree to all of the treasures that are beyond the river." Here's your note, see? "And I'm writing to every treasure that's beyond the river." That'd be the river Euphrates. You cross it, you go back over to Jerusalem. That here it is. When you come to them, they are to do this for you. "The scribe of the law of God, Ezra, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven, shall require of you. It shall be done with all diligence. When he comes and asks you for anything, you do it, and you do it now. Unto 100 talents of silver, and 100 measures of wheat, and 100 baths of wine, and 100 baths of oil, and salt, without prescribing how much." In other words, that's the only limitation I'm going to put on these things, see? I mean, I'm putting on, you have authority to do all of that. "Whatsoever is commanded by the God of heaven, let it be done exactly." You do exactly what you're supposed to do that's over there. And then he says, "Why should God's wrath be against the king and his sons?" In other words, why should I make your God mad at me? Now think about that for just a moment. That sounds real good, and it does turn out good for Ezra. But what kind of a God, what kind of a king is this? Is this a king that is fearing Jehovah and Jehovah only? No, he's a foreign king, but he does have a great respect and a great fear of Jehovah. And he doesn't want to make Jehovah mad, see? And so you go over there and you do this. So you take all these people with you, and it says, "After the wisdom of your God," down there, and 26, "And whosoever will not do the law," whosoever will not do the law of God, the law of the king, let judgment be executed upon him with all diligence, whether it be unto death, or to banishment, or to confiscation of goods, or to imprisonment. In other words, I'm giving you the authority to enforce the laws, even the death sentence. Whatever, anybody going to give you any trouble, here's the authority from me to confiscate their goods, to put them in prison, to put them to death, whatever needs to be done. 27, Ezra's remarks. Now, can you imagine the blessings that Ezra has from all of this? How wonderful this thing really is. All right, he says, "Blessed be Jehovah, the God of our fathers, who hath put such things in the heart, in the king's heart, to beautify the house of Jehovah which is in Jerusalem, and hath extended loving kindness unto me before the king and his counselors, and before all the king's mighty princes. And I was strengthened according to the hand of Jehovah my God upon me, and I gathered together out of Israel chief men to go up with me." So he just was overwhelmed with the generosity. So he goes and he gets chief men. Now, we're not going to read these chief men because none of us would know them anyway. There's one guy I'll point out down in verse 16. Read down through there and see if you see somebody that you know about. There is Zechariah, isn't it? See, you see him down there? So he's going to go in there. He's with them now. Now then, you come on down. You've got some other guys down in here, and now skip down to verse 21. Then I proclaimed a fast there at the river Ahava, that we might humble ourselves before our God to seek of Him a straight way for us and for our little ones and for our substance. So now we're going to have prayer. We're going to humble ourselves before God, ask Him to give us a straight way. That is, be able to take us right in without a whole lot of troubles this year. 22. He said, For I was ashamed to ask of the king a band of soldiers and horsemen to help us against the enemy in the way, because we had spoken unto the king, saying, The hand of our God is upon them that seek Him for good, but His power and His wrath is against all them that forsake Him. So we fasted and besought our God for this, and He was entreated of us. Now, here's something that gives me a little comfort in here, because I find myself in this situation quite often. And that is, have you ever found yourself in a situation of where you say, God will do this, God promised, and God will do it, and then you kind of wonder whether it will be done right or not? You lose your job, God will provide. But I sure wish somebody would drop off $10,000 to get me over this thing somehow or another. Now, here these people have a problem. They're getting ready to go from Babylon down to Jerusalem, and they pray to God, give us a straight path. In other words, keep us out of any problems. And they said, we were ashamed to go ask the king for a band of soldiers to protect us, because we had told the king, our God will protect them that seek Him. So we're ashamed to go ask them. Does that help you any in your relationship? You see the human fallacies that we have a lot of times when we find ourselves in this situation. And if a man as great as Ezra does that, why, I then can say, okay, I'm in pretty good company. Now, he said, Then I set apart 12 of the chiefs of the priests. Now, when he set apart these 12, he gave them all the gold, about $1.5 million worth. We don't know just exactly how much, but that's somewhere in that vicinity. He said, Now you guys have charge of all of this, and you carry it down to Jerusalem, and when you get down there, you take it in and weigh it out, and make sure that all of it is there. So they carried it down, and they did it down there in verse 30. All right, they departed then out of there. They went down, and in verse 35, the children of the captivity that were come out of exile offered burnt offerings unto the God of Israel, 12 bullocks of for all Israel, and 96 rams, and 77 lambs, and 12 he-goats for a sin offering. And they delivered, verse 36, the king's commission unto the king's satraps. That's an officer in the government there, and to the governors beyond the river, and they furthered the people and the house of God. So Ezra and his people get down there now, and what's the job that he's going to have? To teach them the law, see, to restore the law that is there. Okay, when he gets down there, verse 9, it said, Now when these things were done, the princes drew near unto me, saying, The people of Israel and the priests of the Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the lands, that's the Canaanites, doing according to all their abomination, even of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, and the Moabites, and the Egyptians, and the Amorites, for they have taken of their daughters for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed have mingled themselves with the people of the land. So now, let's put this back in perspective here again. Zerubbabel came out. He rebuilt the temple, but how many years has it been now since the temple's been rebuilt and Ezra's coming over here, see? 50 years. Now, during this 50-year period of time, these Jews have gone right back in and married the Canaanite women. right back in and doing that. Now, back in Deuteronomy 7 and verse 13, verse 3, Deuteronomy 7 and verse 3, God He forbid the Jewish people from marrying these 7 nations. You can't marry these 7 nations. But if you marry these nations that you're living among, they're going to draw you away. So you can't do that. Now, they could marry other nations. I mean, they could marry a Greek or somebody that lived way away from there. There's a big difference in marrying where you have a group of people, the whole society is right here, and here's a woman that is embedded in this ungodliness, and you marry her. She is right in there. She has that power to seduce you away. But if there's a woman that lived 500 miles away, and you had married her, see, of another nationality, then you don't have that power struggle that you have going in there. So these people, you're not to marry. Now, when Joshua brought them across there, this was the law. Don't intermarry with Canaanites. What did they do? They didn't kill off all the Canaanites, and so they were associating with them, and that took them into Canaanite idolatry. Now then, they're doing the same thing again. Starting out the same thing again. They haven't gone into the idolatry yet, but they've married them. Now in verse 2, for they have taken of their daughters for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed, that's the Jews, have mingled themselves with the people of the land. Yea, the hand of the princes and the rulers hath been chief in the trespass. So it's not just been the common people, but it's been the leaders of our movement. They're the ones that have been doing this. So Ezra rents his garment, plucks the hair off his head, his beard, and he sat down confounded in verse 3. He just confounded. Have you ever been confounded and you didn't know what to do? There it is. So he sat down confounded. That's Ezra. Then were they assembled unto me. Then were they assembled unto me, every one that trembleth at the words of the God of Israel, because of the trespass of them of the captivity, and I sat confounded until the evening oblation. So we called in everybody that trembles at God's word. He said, I just sat there confounded until what time in the afternoon? In our time, what time in the afternoon? 3 o'clock. That's the evening oblation, would be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At the evening oblation, or the evening sacrifice, I arose up from my humiliation, even with my garments, rent my robe, and I fell upon my knees and spread out my hands unto Jehovah my God, and I said, O my God, I am ashamed and blush to lift up my face to thee. I can't even pray to you in a normal way. The normal way was holding up their hands and looking at God like this. And he said, I'm ashamed and I blush. I can't even look up at you. He fell on his face down there. He said, for our iniquities are increased over our head, and our guiltiness has grown up into the heavens. Since the days of our fathers, we have been exceeding guilty unto this day. And for our iniquities have we, our kings and our priests, been delivered into the hands of the kings of the land, that's the Babylonians, to the sword, to captivity, to plunder, to confusion of face, as it is this day. We're still under their captivity. And now for a little moment, grace hath been shown from Jehovah our God to leave us a remnant to escape, and to give us a nail in the holy place, that our God may lighten our eyes and give us a little reviving of our bondage. So, is the Persian king still over the Jews at this time? Yeah. He's released them to go back. He's given them authority to do this and that, but he's still over these people. And so Ezra says, because of our sins, we were delivered into their hands. And now, you have given us just a little light. You've opened it up just a little bit. And so that we might have a nail in a holy place. What would that mean? That's a colloquial statement. If you got a holy place, that's the place where they needed to be to serve their God. What would a nail in the holy place be? It'd be a permanent thing. See, you drive a nail in it that's up here. So it's a permanent thing that is in there. So it's there. He said, for we are bondsmen. See, we're still bondsmen. Yet our God hath not forsaken us in our bondage, but hath extended loving kindness to us in the sight of the king of Persia, to give us a reviving, to set up the house of our God, to repair the ruins thereof, and to give us a wall in Judah and in Jerusalem. So God has given this. Now, O our God, what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken thy commandments, which thou hast commanded by thy servants the prophets, saying, the land unto which ye shall go to possess it is an unclean land, through the uncleanliness of the people of the lands, through their abominations, which have filled it from one end to another with their filthiness. All of that ungodliness and filthiness associated. Now therefore give not your daughters unto their sons, neither take their daughters unto your sons, nor seek their peace, nor their prosperity forever. Don't try to associate with them. Don't try to make peace with them. Don't try to become as prosperous as they are. Don't have any association with them. He said, shall we break thy commandments and join in affinity with the people? Shall we do this all over again? 15. O Jehovah, the God of Israel, thou art righteous, for we are left a remnant that is escaped, as it is this day. Behold, we are before thee in our guiltiness, for none can stand before thee because of this. We can't stand. We're going right back into what we were. We'll not be able to stand before you. We're headed right back doing exactly the same thing. Now, while Ezra prayed and made confession, weeping and casting himself down before the house of God, there was gathered together unto him out of Israel a very great assembly of men and women and children, for the people wept very sore. And then a guy came up and he made this suggestion. He said, we have trespassed against our God and have married foreign women of the people of the land, yet now there is hope for Israel concerning this thing. Now therefore let us make a covenant with our God to put away all the wives and such as are born of them, according to the counsel of my Lord and of those that tremble at the command of God, and let it be done accordingly to the law. So let us stop, let us make a covenant with God, and let us undo what we have done wrong. God has said you cannot marry those women. We've come back, we have done that very thing. Now, let's undo it. So they had a meeting, and they decided to do it. And they said it's not something that can be done quickly. We're going to have to assign people. Anybody who's married a Canaanite, come before the elders of the city, and we got to dissolve these marriages. So 10. And Ezra the priest stood up and said unto them, ye have trespassed, and have married foreign women to increase the guilt of Israel. Now therefore make a confession unto Jehovah, the God of your fathers, and do his pleasure, and separate yourself from the peoples of the land and from the foreign women. So we've got to do away with this. They go on down, they say this is not a work of 1 or 2 days, and so forth, so we need to do all of this. Go to verse 16. And the children of the captivity did so. And Ezra the priest with certain heads of the father's house after their father's house, and all of them by their names were set apart. And they sat down in the first day of the 10th month to examine the matter. And they made an end with all the men that had married foreign women by the first day of the first month. And among the sons of the priest there were found that had married foreign women, and then it gives the list of the priest. We'll not read them. And so all the people put away their marriages. Down in verse 44, all these had taken foreign wives, that whole list that you got there, and some of them had wives by whom they had children. But they decided, we will go back and we will do what God would have us to do. And so they separated themselves from the Canaanites. What was it they were supposed to do to those Canaanites to start with? Kill them all. They destroyed them all to start with. They didn't do it. And so they got themselves in trouble. They went into captivity because they didn't do it. They came back out of captivity. And where are they headed? Same place again. So Ezra, the man of God, the man who studied the Scriptures, the man who taught the Scriptures, went over and then as reforming them morally, religiously, as far as the Scriptures are concerned, telling them, here's what God says, and here is what we'd better do. And so they did it. And that is the legacy of Ezra. So Zerubbabel did what? Restored the temple. Ezra comes over and he is restoring the law the way it should be. Next week, we'll be introduced to a new man that will come along about 10 years after this by the name of Nehemiah. He will come in and he will have a job. And believe it or not, by the time he gets there, some of these Jews are going to be back doing the same thing again. It's unbelievable what they can do. Okay, there's where we come to our conclusion.